this tutorial, we will explain and show you how to create 4 roster types in survey solutions. Rosters are subsets of questions that are repeated based on some external rule. Survey Solutions has 4 roster types, 3 dynamic rosters and 1 static roster. The 3 dynamic rosters are numeric, list, and multi-select rosters. These rosters require a source question to be placed outside of the roster. The source question determines the size and/or content of the roster as the interview takes place. The static roster, also known as a fixed set of items roster, requires a list of items to be defined in Questionnaire Designer. We will first cover the specifications for the 3 dynamic roster types. A multi-select roster is used when you would like a number of questions to be asked for only the items that have been selected in a multi-select question. For example, you might want to ask the purchase price and length of ownership for various assets a household owns. From the list of all possible assets, you select those owned by the household, and then ask a series of follow-up questions that pertain only to the selected assets. To implement this in Survey Solutions, add the multi-select question with the list of household assets as answer options. Then, click on the Add Roster link on the left-hand panel. Next, define the roster source question and variable name. To add the series of follow-up questions in the roster, right-click on the roster name in the left-hand panel and select the Add Question link in the drop-down menu. Then, add a question asking about the length of time that the household has owned that specific item. This question will be generated for each item selected in the multi-select source question. To use the answers given in the multi-select source question in the question text, include roster title with % signs on each side. You can choose to add additional questions within the roster. In a list roster, elements are defined during the interview. This roster type is commonly used to gather information on household members and agricultural land that a household owns and/or cultivates. In this example, we will illustrate how to create a list roster to gather information on each individual household member. To do this, first create a list question asking to list all household members. Then, add a roster and choose the list question that you have just created as the source question. Within the roster, add a numeric integer question that asks for the individual's age. Continue adding other questions in the roster to gather more information about the household. A numeric roster defines the number of rows in a roster through a numeric question set outside of the roster. A numeric roster is used when your questionnaire first asks how many items to capture in the roster. For example, how many enterprises the household operates, before asking detailed information about each item, like the name, sector, and years of operation for each enterprise. To implement this example, first add a numeric question asking about the number of enterprises the household owns. Then, add a numeric roster and choose the numeric question you have just created as the roster source question. Next, add questions in the roster to collect information regarding the name of the enterprise and the number of years the enterprise has been operating. You can choose to add additional questions within the roster. Unlike the dynamic rosters discussed previously, the rows of a fixed set of items roster are predefined in the design phase of the questionnaire. The fixed set of items roster is commonly used when there's a set of standard items where you have the same subset of questions to ask about each item on the list. For example, imagine that you have a set of commonly consumed household food items, and you would like to collect information on the average number of days a week that the household consumes each item. To implement this example, first add a fixed set of items roster, and then add each food item by clicking on the Add Item link. Next, add a numeric integer question in the roster that asks how many times in the last 7 days has anyone in the household consumed the item. You can choose to add additional questions within the roster. We will discuss other features of survey solutions in subsequent tutorials.